Alrighty. Okay, so a prediction, we're going to talk a little bit of a prediction at the start. And I did want to say this is a ridiculous thing, but I did, maybe in the first lecture, mention ethereal whooshing sounds. And I forgot what it was from. It was from Twin Peaks. So maybe I said that the other day. I just want to make sure I documented that. Okay. Okay, so sports and stories. We've written one paper on Australian rules football long time ago on the shapes of story, no, shapes of games. And it's this kind of thing. You can do so this is a couple of nights ago, it's the Clippers versus the Washington basketball team. It's not the Washington basketball team, but so the way this is structured, is this going to work for me? Yeah. The way this is structured is just their scores, right? And of course, you can take the difference, right? What's the difference? And then, and I talked about this a little bit in pucks, these things statistically, for basketball at least, look very much like random walks as a whole, which is a little rough. But you can see this is not going well for the Clippers who are in red, right? They'd take at least, a bunch of minutes to score, and then, they're still at 4 points after half of the first quarter. Just dreadful through here, right? This is now there's like less than 5 minutes left in the second quarter, and they're down by 31 points. Good morning. This is about prediction, right? And I know we looked at the Bills Chiefs the other day. It went like this, which is, heart attack city. But this one, so pretty bad at halftime, right? You're down by 30 points. So this is horrible. But you can see that sort of coming slow, and then they're struggling in the fourth quarter. One player scores 7 points in the last, 4 or 5 seconds or something ridiculous. There's a crazy thing that happens here. I guess the last 10 seconds. And they win, right? Someone gets fouled on a three-pointer and they get the extra. It's just a shocking end of the game. So this is this gigantic comeback. And if you look at the win probability, it looks like this. There's a little bit, you start, if you're, this is back here. It's a weird thing to think about because back here it's, there's a 0.4, like this if you're based on history, right, 0.4% chance. And that's durable. So you would think through here, there are so many games where it's just the flat lines, But now and then we get this, and of course I'm showing you this one-off story. This is the story you tell. But there's this isn't good. It's like, you're in trouble. This is not 50-50, but it's definitely back within 1 and 4. And then, yeah. Anyway, we like these. We'll tell those stories. Great comeback. Okay, so sort of connected to that is I'll give you a trope. I like doing the tropes. This is not quite dead. So it's still somewhat thematically connected to the bad ads on this thing. Oh, I can log in, I think. So this is the monster, right? The monster is never quite dead. Like if you're in a horror movie, it's basic. I mean, it's a trope that's sort of played up a little bit too. Like, actors or whatever, the characters will reference it. And they're always coming back. There's a ton of examples for this. But this is also, pandemics like this, right? So and I know I've mentioned, but you don't want to be thinking it's gone. I mean, I think many things like this, but the pandemics are generally a good example of this, sort of a real massive scale systems monster thing. Yeah, so it's a mortal blow, right? They could not. It's a bit extreme, right? So they couldn't have possibly survived. The heroes won. And I know I showed the scene in Pucks that this is from. This is named from. The name troper is. Let me get it. I think it's Monty Python, right? Which is well, I didn't show this one, but there's a Oh, no. That's that one. I thought it was that one, but this is the one where it's Prince Herbert. True. Right. But it's Lancelot, right? No, but there's also Lancelot with what's his horse's name? It's Terry Gilliam. He's on there with his coconuts. You shall not have died in vain, whatever, Clancy or something, and he's like, oh, I'm feeling better, Well, you shall not have been mortally wounded then, sir. I think I'll recover. It's just, doesn't really, He's trying to get the story, but it's not there. Wesley, of course, to blade, right, to blade. Have fun storming the castle. All right, okay, so Um, I did do a Princess Bride theme for assignments. I'll have to go back to that one. It's great. First one was called The Cliffs of Insanity. Okay, so but it's a good trope. It's a good trope, and it's unbelievable that it happens in real life, and we just stare it in the face and don't seem to realize. So I think I had that here. So this is, my high quality tweets. This is just being a smart ass, but it's IHME, right? So they've been this big forecasting unit. Bill Gates funds them. The Gates Foundation funds them. That's, I think, their principal funding. So in some ways, Bill Gates is the big bad, right? He's not putting chips in heads, but he's funding this idiotic thing. I'm going to say it. It's terrible. It's the University of Washington. I don't know what. I just don't understand this, because look at this. This is their prediction, starting in early January, of deaths going forward. We're talking about prediction. This is their cone of uncertainty. So by here, it's like we know, right? Like, we're not sure about this. It's a little bit fuzzy, but it's about the same, and then it's all good. It's going to be done. I mean, you would have to, if your model produced that and it didn't get, if it doesn't sort of grow or get to some steady state and stay there, I don't know what's going on. Anyway, they defend it. This is our 10th. They say things like, this is our 10th model, blah, blah, blah. Here's a former Puck student. Anyway, Carl Bergstrom, I'm just here for the reverse cone of uncertainty. And Bergstrom's at University of Washington. I don't know if you know him, but he's been quite vocal. Does, well, a number of things, birds, but he's also done a lot of stuff with contagion and also social contagion. So he's had a lot to say over the now a couple of years. Anyway, so people kind of enjoyed that. Cone of silence. Does anyone know what that is? That's from, this is from Get Smart, which is a long time ago. This thing. The Chief. Okay, that's pretty obscure. Yeah, with Steve Carell, right? Yeah. I don't know if it was. And Inspector Gadget is Get Smart. Yeah, yeah. Would you believe 3 men and a rubber dinghy? It's like the whole thing. Anyway, yes. It's just. This is crazy. I mean, this has been I should say, Bergstrom's book is Calling Bullshit. Is maybe something you guys want. Okay, that's Bergstrom. Okay. Yeah. So that's a course.
It's a fun book. He's so mad at it. Just like everything everyone is doing wrong.
Just in science, statistics, right? Like or just anything, right? Right.
Yeah. He's got kind of a broad aim.
Yeah.
It's fun.
He's
Yeah.
just angry.
Angry professor.
Really, good, well thought out.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a very unfortunate circumstance because he's basically right. And he's tilting at windmills of stupidity. Anyway, it's just really weird. Yes, so it's a book, it's a course. He's good fun. So that was fun. And I know I've told you about this again, but I looked at this once more, idiotically perhaps, but we've been above 1,000 deaths on average at the week scale per day since since August 20, right? And this is just Thanksgiving. Like, that's a recording issue. But if you look at excess deaths, it was actually a full month earlier, right? So even that, which is a difficult thing to track because it's also delayed, you can only make estimates. Like, for now, the nowcasting for actual deaths is problematic. 6 weeks, 7 weeks ago, not bad. But this is, so that was a full, and you can see this is the COVID deaths reported. You can see that really big lag here, another big lag back here. It doesn't, if you could shift it back, it still wouldn't quite fit under all of this. Really not right here. And to be honest, this is the South, right? This is Florida, this is Texas. That's when that was being hit. So that's just a real recording problem there. Early on, of course, we just didn't know what we were doing. What are you doing? What happened? Wow, it is, okay. I don't know what that was. And then, the economist model, at least, who knows, right? They're very uncertain. It's unlikely to get up to here, I would guess, but that's where they are. And anyway, where we are now is maybe 1.1 to 1.3 million people. That's a 95% confidence interval for excess deaths. So that's, everything. It doesn't have to be from COVID, right? It can be because of, but that's 40% more than the actual estimate. And of course, India, we have no idea. That's 1 to 8 million. No idea. All right. But again, prediction, even just, but the nowcast, like just what is going on now for a lot of systems, that's a huge achievement. Getting that right is a huge achievement. And because we're humans, even if we claim to measure now, we'll harness it in some way. So we can have a bad measurement, but we'll feed it into other things, and that, then we're in trouble. Happy to do it. Okay, there's some interesting stuff. Okay, so I wanted to kind of I'll talk about this happiness stuff. And I know I have these more advanced word shift things. I mean, as I've said, they've kind of become more advanced. I need to put in a separate set of slides, but I'll see how I can present this to you today. Yes.
Before you get started, where should we send things at?
So you can just send them to me on Teams at this point, just in a direct. Is that all right? I will change because I have to change some notes on the site, and I will get that sorted out. I don't think we're going to use
Oh, how you did it anywhere particular?
just a direct message.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do a naming convention.
Yeah. So this is because I had to sort of blow it up a little bit for okay. Maybe the best way to do this is to go to a previous one. This one should have it. Ah, there you go. Yeah, so this would be it here. I mean, you don't. C says 300, fine, it doesn't matter. But the main thing is to have the assignment number, first name, last name, right? So there's the 06 in here, and this is if you're not familiar with this little formatting structure, right, this means integers, it means 2 places, and pad it with zeros, which is a very nice thing. It took me a long time to discover that was a feature built in like 1969 or something by people who made Unix, because Unix was basically like Excel gone wild. Like that was, early on it was like tables and sorting things. I mean, that's what we're doing. Anyway, that's a nice little thing. So if you need to pad things with, like if you want 3 digits and you want it to start at 001, 002, 003, you put percentage 03D. You don't have to do any code. I'm just telling you what the notation is. Of course, within the scripts that I use to make all the assignments, it has this sort of stuff everywhere. And the reason for that is because then when you order things, 01, 02, 03, they're ordered properly, right? So when you list things in a directory, see, in general, you want to do that, and I really strongly recommend, just in general, prefixing many things you do with this, or at least this. Later on, time is the big sort. It's ticking away. It's reliable. We don't seem to have a time crunch. Well, we kind of do. Yeah. Which you would, and of course for like whatever GitHub and stuff, like that's in there somewhere. Yeah, right. I think tweets have a thing that tells you that it's down to a second, but then I think it's jumbled. Maybe like so you can't. There's actually temporal obfuscation, so you can't quite tell the ordering. Maybe at some small enough level. The early tweets, by the way, were just numbered. This is tweet 44, 45, 46. By count.
Oh, okay.
And so when we were collecting them early on, we literally had them in order. And you couldn't, if someone responded to someone, like you see they responded to, it would be to message 402. So you'd have to go back and find that one. There wasn't like, now they're all buried inside, like they, it's like a turducken tweets.
Nice though, when it worked like
It was great. It's easy to count.
Yeah, that'd be so hard to do.
You can see what was missing, but people have figured out how to get around it because you can see that the stamp for it involves like the server. There's a couple of structures in it, so you can, people have kind of backed out what the frame. It's not just a random number, right? Sort of thing. What if it's the little snowflake thing or something? So you can kind of guess. So there's some efforts to like scrape every possible tweet off, which is insane. Well, most it's unbelievably expensive to get the so-called fire hose. If you want to collect them all, we get 10%, which most of the time we didn't pay for.
How does it randomly sample?
Yeah, so that people have looked at that too, and it's not quite perfectly random. Yeah, and I think we looked at it early on too, and it might have been like the first things from each second or something,
Oh.
which is sort of all right. But I know there's something funny about it. Yeah, and it leads to temporal arbitrage possibilities with I don't know. People are clever, right? Yeah.
I don't think 10% of all Twitter is still so.
It is. What it does make problematic though is network reconstruction. It's because you've taken out a lot. But anything that's retweeted a little bit, emphasized, you might you have a 1 in 10 chance of having the original tweet, like a Trump tweet, right? You have 1 in 10 chance of having original tweet, but it's amplified so much that you get it. So it's a nice.
Yeah, so
You kind of get the overall. Right. Well, what this thing, Twitter, has amplified, you absolutely get. Yeah.
And you get all the replies to a given tweet.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Again, 10%. Yeah. But if there are a million replies, and you don't, you're not looking, you don't think every one of them is important, but just sort of the texture of them is important, then you get it. But in terms of sequencing and networks, that's a harder thing to rebuild. You can go in and like dig things out and so on. Reddit, you can get all of Reddit.
Are you storing those tweets on like the back?
Yeah. It's on the VAC. It's in various different, it's just text files to start with. Now, Story Wrangler for long is built around various kinds of database things. But because it is a bit of a hard thing. You want time series. So you want to not be able to just go to a day and say, I want the words on that day. That's good. But then you want to say, I want the word chicken quickly. You don't want to go to all the tweets and search for it. So and then what you want to do is say, I want all the tweets that contain chicken, and I want the time, everything around it, the ambient stuff. And that's a super interesting thing to do. So we did that with Trump tweets. Just the word Trump, right? So then we collected everything around it. But you can say, I have these words for COVID. Batch of words, find every tweet that has them. You kind of have to have some sort of principal reason for selecting those words. And then you get this kind of subset, this sort of tranche of tweets, and then that's its own evolving forest of words. And so there are gazillions of those, right? There's all of Twitter, which is a bit weird because at the top of it is essentially K-pop, right? It's BTS, but also just music in general and sports. Like that's fine, right? There's sort of like it's a giant water cooler fandom crazy thing, but then you want to say, okay, I want all the ones about cats or the bird people or whatever it is, right? And then whereas Reddit is structured straight away. And then Facebook, God knows what. We don't want to get Facebook's terrifying. Okay.
We'll talk about one of like the former like lead software engineers at Twitter is in Vermont. He runs
Oh, right.
biocognitive now. Oh, yeah. He was like the software.
Early on, right? Yeah. It's interesting. There are a few people who definitely, from that first. Well, when did they leave? Maybe two.
Must have been like 7-ish years ago.
Yeah. Which so it had done, yeah. But a lot has happened in the last 7 years, of course, too, right? Yeah. There's always a sense it might kind of evaporate at some, or maybe it will, but like it's been kind of a thing more recently, I think. No, everyone ridiculed Twitter for a long time. They didn't know what it was. But ultimately it is people just putting statements into the ether with only time really attached to it. That's it. Which is kind of unreal. It's sort of an amazing thing. Okay, so, all right. Should I belabor this? All right, so I'll belabor this a little bit. So I'm going to talk about this happiness bias later on, soon. This positivity bias, which turns out to be a safety bias, which we'll get to that later. But this is well into, and I need to put this properly into slides, but I'll just give you a sense of it. It's page 25 of supplementary material for a PNAS paper in 2015. Unfortunately, the editor's like, oh, we just don't, I don't know why they said this, but we're just too much in the supplementary, so just make it short. I don't know why, but it's on the archive, right? We have all this extra stuff, and this is sort of this elaboration, of explaining and understanding word shifts, which are these like lexical derivatives. I mean, I'm still trying to find, but it's like lexical calculus or something, It does go beyond that because it's not just about words, it's about types, right? So these could be species in a forest or something like that. You could have something like that. And that's what allotaxonometry from Puck's was sort of moves out to. Allotaxonometry is just saying, here are two Zipf distributions, right? What are the differences? How do we compare them? And it could be ranks or probabilities. That's the story there. It's very basic and fundamental. When we come to something like measuring happiness, right, we have a score associated with a system, and then we have a score associated with this other system, the same kind of measurement. We want to see why the score has changed, or, and we have all, this categorical data that we can look at. So this is comparing it's the last 10% of the Count of Monte Cristo in the original French to a region 30, 40% in. Right, so just taking that block of words, scoring it, block of words. And this is because, and as I'll get to later on, we have 10 languages now. I guess we did that in 2013 and 14. 10 languages where we have scores for 10,000 words, commonly used words. So, yeah, not so much in prison anymore, right? Good things are happening, dream, yeah, so life and right. So generally, it's an uplift. This is a story where the main character wins. There are a lot of stories that end badly. This one ends well. But it's the same thing I showed you the other day, and I kind of asked you to work through. But you can see it's just sort of attempts to be more formal in the way it's structured. So this is really just the normalization of word usage, right? So it's word W, in text T, and then it's given a lens L. So this is sort of a nice, it's an adornment of shorts, but it's a lens L. This is meaning a lexical lens, meaning we have this list of words for which we have scores. If we want to measure something like entropy, then the lens is all of the words, right? We don't have to have the thing we're interested in when we measure Shannon's entropy is just log of the inverse of its probability, right? So we have that. It's not, when we do something like happiness, there's this external measure of it that's scored. You could have other things, very simple things like word length, right? Stuff that's built, that's just sitting there. How much it adds up if you added all the atoms of the font together. Like there are things that are just sitting there. But stuff that's been evaluated from outside, like happiness, then that's, we have to bring that in. And that's where this comes in, right? So we have this probability here of word W given this lens L, given this text T, and we're putting some score. So in general, this can be just any score. That's averaged. And I went through this kind of derivation the other day. But this, again, it's a little more ornate. It's the same kind of discussion. We kind of move things around. I know there's a lot to see here. But, we have a difference in happiness between two texts, and we just play around with that until we can write it as a sum of these products, which is the difference in the probabilities of a word appearing given a lens. And then this is just there's a little, so we thought about this a lot, I suppose, but it's the average happiness of a word minus the average of the whole text. Now, words can have pretty big ranges, right? They can go, this is this 1 to 9 range, right? So 1 is terrible words, 9 is happy time words. So they can have a big range. Of course, averaging things will push them down, right? So generally averages of text are between sort of 5 and 7. So this is going to be a more muted score. It's an average of many things. So this is, one word, a whole text. And what we're interested in, what we've rearranged it to do, again, just to say this again, is we've set it up so that the difference will, if it's plus or minus here, it's going to do the right thing. If a word is happier than the text we started with, or sadder than the text it's going to, this contribution is going to do the right thing. It's going to be a plus or a minus, right? That's going to make sense as we move from this average happiness score to this average happiness score, right? So if it's going up, then the ways that can happen is this is a plus and this is a plus. So happier words are being used more. Could be a minus and a minus, right? That gives us a plus. So these are negative words that are being used less. So it should make sense. Or it could be plus minus or minus plus. And a minus plus means a negative word that's being used more or a positive word that's being used less. So that, again, it's a little bit, but it should be interpretable. You can see these word shifts trying to get a little further along with these things, like the way to organize them, make it more compact. The bars are thinner here, the words are sitting on top. A lot of stuff is removed, so it's sort of like a little insert. And then there were circles in earlier versions, now they're little summary bars like this. Just trying to it's still perhaps too much. I don't know. We've tried to get. I think now finally we have that Python package. People are using it. It's certainly being cited kind of a lot. So that's good. And I never made any of these scripts available because I'm too old and whatever. But I still want to. Anyway. It is, and there is an these things are thousands of hours. It's just a ridiculous amount of time has gone into this stuff, and it doesn't. I don't know what else to say. It's just a huge amount of obsessive craziness.
It'd be a fun project. I know you can open source that. It'd be fun to maybe make it public and documented.
Documented, yeah. I have the scripts. I just never really. Yeah. Well, let me show you the more. I think this is kind of where I stopped, but again, we started to go beyond words, and you see that with the paper that Ryan led in the end. That's a paper that I wrote a bunch of stuff, and I forgot about it. Like a couple of years later, I looked back and I'd written all of this stuff, and then it became oh my God. Anyway, so yeah, I think that's a problem. Okay, so there are some. I'm going to try to explain this madness to you, right? So it's going to be this. This is word shifts gone completely berserk, and you should be. And I know this is terrible because it's within a thing. Oh, I also want to put out. See this? This is sort of the default, I guess, physical review, but LaTeX kind of colorings for links. So you can go, and there are different ones for citations and whatever. Terrible, absolutely terrible. And I don't know why I just sort of persisted with that. But if you look at this absurdity here, right, there's a nice blue that I've made, and changing all this URL color, site color, all the links. I'm telling you the most ridiculous thing. So if you now look at, I'm digitally remastering these objects. If you go and look at so now these are it's a much more appealing color. But I don't know why this is, but they come out with, like green screen, green, and blue, at the edge of the color cube. MATLAB did this forever. Like the default things would be just horrendous, and if I look back at my original, I have papers with those just a horrible color scheme.
Like default Julia.
It's got to be much better.
It,
No.
I like it. It looks like an 80s video game.
Okay, well, there's some appeal to that, I suppose. Yeah. But the Python's one is better, and MATLAB's one is now better too. It's interesting. It took so long.
Also, Julia's default is dog mode. They're like, you're not doing this.
Right.
Not doing this with the
You keep the windows.
Yeah, that's exactly. They were like, no. This is for science fiction. You're not leaving this computer.
No photons will be from the sun. That is, yeah. Anyway, there's a small thing about color, but and we'll get to it later on. There are the perceptually uniform color maps. You guys work with them at all? These are because the default color maps for a long time in many of these things too are also terrible. Like just things like the American flag or like going through the rainbow, right? You know, and that which rainbow is a strong thing, but it just if you look at some um, heat map with that, you can't really tell. Like, is this thing twice as big as this one? Doesn't speak to you like that.
It's like I try
Your
to
brain
tell
doesn't work like that.
colors like not linear in that sense that
Right.
like you want it to be.
We'll come back to it, but let me just. People have worked on this. I think that's what it is, color maps. And let's see. Here's what's in our. So these are attempts to do this.
Man, some of those are rough.
Yeah, and I will say that there's only one that I kind of like, and that's well, it's in the allotaxonometry stuff. Uh, okay, I should do that. But it's called magma. I like magma. Magma's kind of good. There's like swampy kind of ones. Oh, MATLAB, yeah. Oh no,
So cool.
I have no idea what this thing is.
Those coherently injected density
Does it have some more things here? Yep, we can go here. Okay. Okay, I think this is the main one. Yeah, see, look at these color maps. This is jet, right? I mean, you know, you have a color bar next to it so you can see, yes, this is more intense. You know, I mean, it's something, but it can be deeply misleading. And I have it in some of my, you know, I have some of the terrible. These are like grayscale, not bad. And then these are the new color maps. So magma is one. Um, Inferno, plasma, Viridis, which is a little. So apparently, supervillains have more disproportionately green and purple in their colors. So it's sort of it's kind of interesting, like the balance of colors in superheroes and supervillains.
Do you think it's like an association with disease or something?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little.
Like that we do that for villains? Do you think that's why?
I don't know, but it's there. But the purple's a bit funny because it's a royal kind of. I mean, you know, in some cultures, but green is tricky because it's like grass and plants, and that's good. But also, it's not, you know, it's not good on the human. Yeah, yeah, or your cheese, unless that's a kind of. Some people like that kind of stuff.
I remember trying to like visualize like density on a scale with Carter as like a while back, but we were like looking at like how to build our own like color scaling algorithm because we wanted to look like really
Yeah,
to measure density, and like this plot showed like this parabolic like color of like how colors are distributed, and I was just like, no shot. No way am I trying to like find linearness in this.
yeah, it's hard. I mean, and you know, from in my PhD, I remember like just messing around with like making a color map and then multiplying all the numbers, you know, like raising them to some power, like power of a half or squared to kind of get it to move. You know, so it's just terrible. I'm just trying to like make the thing. You know, you're not trying to cheat, and mislead, but you're just trying to get it to like be useful. But color maps are you got to be careful with them. Yeah.
It was easier for us because we were just trying to show a difference in terms of orders of magnitude, not necessarily like a difference between like 100 and 500. We didn't really care about something like
Right.
that.
Right.
So it was a little bit easier. I feel like to show like the difference between 1 and 1,000 with a color map.
Well, I mean, you can log anything. You know, like you can yeah. But so there are a few, and so you can look at those if you're trying to use color maps. You should, there's perceptual universe. There's a whole body of work around them, and
Color group is pretty good.
oh yeah, color right, right. So and then you've got the ones where you might have a zero in the middle, so you want to be careful with that. So you've got ones that are stuck. Right. I mean, look, this is all a big part of it. Okay, so look at this ridiculous thing. This is second half of Moby Dick versus the first half, just straight up. It gets sadder. And so, generally, this is a big word shift. This is a long one, 50 words. I mean, it's a lot of the words. But poor, die, dead. I did take out cry and crying, which means yelling. and also coffin. But coffin's a bit tricky, and maybe I mentioned this in Pucks. Coffin's a little bit tricky because it is a last name. It's a Nantucket last name, so there's a character with that name. But if you look through the book, coffins are also being the kind of the whaling boats are being referred to as various kinds of terms of coffins, right? Because you're floating around in a water coffin, not good. But yeah, these are things that are not going well. I mean, a whale is trying to kill you and your friends, so so pretty bad. Getting buried, yeah. So really, so it's again, this is sort of a test thing. It's not just say this is how you should read Moby Dick. And I realize maybe a little hard to. You see that okay? All right, so this is an elaborate version to kind of show how these word shifts kind of work, and the structure is such that, first of all, there's just the raw counts of words. This is happiness here, and then this is the frequency. This is a probability distribution of where they are. Right. So these are sadder words down here, happier words at the top, and this is simply in Moby Dick. What's the distribution of words? And you see most of them are inside this 3 to 7 range. What we're going to do is apply a lens that actually removes those words, right? These are neutral words, and you guys were kind of asking about this before, and we'll come back. But this is a game where you can we could just take the happy words, we just take the sad words, we could do lots of things. But we're going to say let's just get rid of those, especially the neutral ones in the middle. These are words like the and of and. There are a lot of them. They're neutral, so we don't really need to use them. I wonder if this is working. Anyway. So we're going to chop them out, but we're going to be fairly aggressive about it and actually remove. Yeah, okay. Oop. Let's try to escape. Capture the book. So these are probability distributions, if you like, or frequency distributions. They're normalized. What we're going to do is, and then this is the average happiness for this book, for this side of the book, and the average happiness for the second one. It's yeah. Did I get that right?
Do you like
Well, I guess the comparison here is the references here.
do you like see happiness sadness like complete opposites in this context? So if you have
It's a great question.
if you have like a plot of happiness, it's just the inverse of that sadness, or would you want like a different?
So if you just take a lens of happiness and a lens of sadness, and this I've never published it, they are different time series. They're really different time series. And because we have scores for these words that are nuanced, right? It's not just so some sentiment dictionaries will just give you a +1 or a -1 or a 0, which is fair enough. Like it's a very coarse thing, but that means like paradise and I don't know. Maybe even onions, they're both +1, like the hamburger, they're +1s. Probably not the same, right? So you see different time series for them. And really what gives you the overall happiness thing is the relative balance of positive to negative. So it's really the overall number of positive words and the overall number of negative words. Because this nuance sort of stuff matters, but it's the big thing is moving it is it 70%, 30%, 73%, 27%? That's the thing that's giving the overall shape. And I have to do this. There's the overall happiness average time series. You might look at that. There's just the happy word ones and the sad word. They're different looking things. But if you look at the balance of happy to sad words, it looks like the average overall. Because that's what's just the sheer number is the big, because that number can vary so much, right? You can have a word that appears 10 times, 1,000,000 times, 1,000 times. Happiness can only vary a little bit. It's still important to have to be more than ±1 because it gives you all this nuance and story, right? So, no, that's a really good question. And I have this other work that I'm still, I've been, again, this is maybe 8 years into this, but kind of returned to it over and over, and it led to this new meaning work. But this one, it's taking we did this other survey where we did happiness, happiness, sadness, disgust. Um, let me get it right. I'll just say it like this: happiness and then surprise, and then disgust, anger, fear, and sadness. Right. So these are sort of, there are many conceptions of what the fundamental emotions of a person, or indeed organisms in general, might be. There's a pretty famous one. This is Paul Ekman's idea. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It was Lie to Me was a TV show based on it. But it's the micro expressions thing that you can just see someone like quickly, like, goes through some state and you're like, that was a disgust. Like your emotions are expressed through your facial musculature. And I'll come back to that a little bit with comics, Scott McCloud making comics. There's debates about this, right? So some people, have findings like you can only see 4, you can whatever, or maybe there are hundreds. The idea that there are like dimensions of emotion, actually, it's like late 1800s, people sort of coming up with this idea of like there's a sort of space that you could put emotions into. So just as that's set up, and those 4, there are 4 negative ones. Surprise is kind of off by itself, and happiness is by its own thing. So happiness doesn't have a lot of nuance, and we'll kind of come back to this. But this is I don't the opening quote, the line. There's a little sort of quote or little kind of standalone maxim sitting at the top of Anna Karenina, right? That happy families are all the same, and unhappy families are unhappy in their own individual ways. Depends how it's translated. But which Jared Diamond, and all the anthropologists kind of hate him or whatever, but like he kind of lifted that out, and I think it was him used that to come up with this sort of framing for Guns, Germs, and Steel of like, how what are the conditions? You need conditions to be, you need a number of conditions to be met for civilizations to take off. Lots of debate about that. But broadly speaking, it's not so wrong. I mean, at the other end, for things to fall apart, there are lots of ways for things to fall apart. I mean, just ourselves. As you get older, like just one thing failing, organizations failing, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be like everything fails. Like just one part can fall and it's gone. So that is then sort of, I think, makes sense with having this sort of diverse set of negative emotions, because you need to be specific about the bad thing, right? You can't just say bad thing. You need to know that it's what it is. So, that at least seems to sort of fit. So I guess what we'll see is that there are less, negative words are used less than positive words, but there's perhaps more of a spread of what negative words can cover, right? They're specific. You don't run around yelling them all the time unless things are really bad, like really bad. But generally speaking, if you've got a functioning society, it's not the dominant thing. Let me try to explain this little madness, right? So you've got these distributions of the words. This is just underlying. There's no happiness. It's for happiness, but we're not measuring anything quite yet. Then we're going to just blank out those middle ones, right? We're just going to say, okay, let's just remove this. Our lens. Our lens is actually going to be this part here, and we're going to put a block on those words. So we're going to just have happy words here and sad words here, and then we're going to weight them by how far they are away from the average score here. So that's what this is doing. This is this H minus H average of a word minus the average of the first text. It's over here for some reason. You can see these very subtle things happen, like these colors flip. So now they're lining up. So these are words that are making this side more positive. These are words that are making this side more negative. Anyway, it steps through, kind of broken that whole piece out here as well. And then this one is weighted by the relative difference. So you can see that a lot more negative words are being used, at least with this lens. Anyway, maybe this is, yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. It sort of steps through the algebra of that thing. Yeah. Okay. And then, these elaborate things appear for all of them. The script, what it did would make this one, so it's a real diagnostic tool, but also make like a little one, which you could then, use in some way. Yeah. And so this is an example of that where this is Moby Dick and there's a little overlay and it tells you, a particular word shift for it. The ones we have online, of course, you can choose whatever you want, which we'll come back to. Yeah.
How do you decide where to set your bounds for your only happy and sad words?
So you mean the lens?
Do you do 7 to 3 every time?
Right. So we'll come back to it, but I'll discuss kind of basically we're able to see that first of all, one idea could have been to just get rid of words that have a high standard deviation because people don't agree on them. But we're not doing that. We're actually just getting rid of words based on their average because it also hits that as well. So words that have a high standard deviation tend to be in the middle because people disagree on them. So swear words are like that, for example, right? So, F-bombs are in here, but they have a high standard deviation. So in some ways, they're just not good words to be used in isolation. So these words down here and these words here, people generally agree on them, right? They really do agree on them. So that helps. The thing is, there's a dial, so you can play around with this. But what we've discovered, at least there's a reason for this. You need to start at about 4.5 and 5.5. You actually want to there is a reason for getting rid of the middle ones. So this is like a way of finding out stop words. So 4.5 to 5.5, and once you get out too far, then you've lost words, right? So eventually, in some ways, what this is doing is kind of like changing a picture to make its boundaries more sharp.
Yeah.
Right, it's a little blurry. Then you tune this thing, and now you can kind of see it. And as you tune it more, it gets sharper and sharper and sharper. And then you turn it too far, and it sort of goes, right? So there's and we'll come back to it because it's an unusual property of language. Well, I guess unexpected. I didn't know this would be in here. So why is it 4.5 to 5.5? Well, if you think about how people are scoring these words, right, they're putting them at 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, right? These Likert scales. They can only put them at those blobs. So if you've got a word that's between 4.5 and 5.5 on average, if you round it to the nearest integer is 5, it's neutral, right? So people on average don't rate this word as being significantly away from neutral. So if you rounded all the words to the nearest, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that would get rid of these. We'd say they're neutral. So you can see that kind of sharp effect. And then generally speaking, for things like, if you look at Hidonami online, it's like 4 to 6. Some of the visualizations we have a little lens thing. You can change it and play around with it. So we'll do that at some point. But some of the fixed ones are just, you have to make a choice, right? Because it is more complicated. But what you should see is basically, if you're looking at, say, time series, you shouldn't see fundamentally big changes in those time series as you play around with this lens. This exactly where it's like the plus or minus relative to 5. If you just chose that happy words or negative words, that's going to give you a different time series. Right. So volume of text means that let's say it's a time series. Yeah, you just adapt. And this is a tricky thing, but in principle, you want an adaptive thing. So maybe 15 minutes is fine for Twitter, right? But maybe you're interested in days anyway. But say you have like the local newspaper is not enough, right? So it could be at the week scale. And then you want to think about, you wouldn't want to do every 2 days because it's just sort of a weird, you sort of go from sub-hour, like hour kind of time scales That's good. Day timescales are good, but then you have to think about when is midnight, like, or when is the end of the day. Biological midnight is sort of 4 or 5 a.m., right? That's when we're most like asleep in a sense, and it's sort of like when the latest people who go to bed late are still kind of going to bed, and the early people are getting up. So it's not midnight, right? It's actually kind of more 4 or 5. So you might want to break it there, but then you go up to 7 days. Months also sort of makes sense. Um,
So I'm guessing the more, like the higher volume of text you have, the more like picky you can be with where you set those bounds, right?
yeah, you can be right. Yes, yes, but generally you want 1,000 kind of words. So, this is so that's an elasticity you have to right. So if we're comparing different parts of Moby Dick, these are nice, these are huge sets of words. But if you kind of went down to like one sentence, call me Ishmael, that would be terrible, right? That's it would, and you'd see it kind of as you were shrinking one text, maybe relative to this big other one, you'd see it kind of start to, like this would kind of smash all over the place eventually. Where that happens exactly, but I mean, you can imagine having a dial that like takes the second half, takes the first half, but tunes it back and back and back and back, and this would be kind of okay, but you'd see things blink on and off a little bit, and then it would start to really break apart. Um, yeah, what's appearing in this side would stay stable-ish, right? Because those words are not going away, but this would start to kind of mess around a little bit. So these are great questions. I mean, this is great. It's good. So these you can see they kind of went out of control. Um,
Bittersweet. We were just trying to like categorize that one. Was that just this emotion?
Bittersweet. Yeah, I mean, is it an emotion?
Yeah, is it an emotion?
Well, I think there are sort of very fundamental kind of emotional things, but it's definitely kind of it's a more complex kind of one that, so pity and compassion are interesting ones, for example, because they're a bit of positivity and sadness.
Yeah.
So you can have these very, yeah, conflicting things put together, right? So hate is kind of anger and disgust. I didn't quite get that, but what I was talking about with those 6 emotions the other before is that what's emerging is that there's really just, like we've sort of seen before, this valence kind of thing. Right? There's a big positive negative axis, and then the second axis is intensity. So like joy is very positive and it's intense. Um, war and those things are very negative and intense. And then you kind of go out to, if you do an SVD type thing, then like the next modulation on that is much smaller, and it's something that's basically hate. It's kind of disgust plus anger, and that's sort of like that would be, an orthogonal in this space. If you try to look at an orthogonal space, it's sort of an orthogonal dimension. So you kind of have these other words, or these main dimensions of like positive, negative, basically, and then so it's just like negative just means a bad thing, and then there's this nuanced thing. All these other dimensions add on to the negativity to kind of tune it towards whatever it is, like disgust, sadness is another one, and then sort of more just like, so there's like sort of like pure fear, but it does seem that anger and disgust, at least when people look at individual words, get kind of combined, and that's more like that's kind of a hate thing.
How does surprise show up? Like, since it is like actually maybe the only neutral one.
Yeah, I think it gets pushed back in. It becomes kind of intensity, right? So what you see as surprise is correlated with all of them, because the happier, the more fear, the more anger, the more sadness, the more disgust. They all go up with surprise goes up with all of them. So it's sort of not, yeah. It's it's left out, by the way, in Inside Out, the Pixar movie. Right, so the Pixar movie Inside Out is built around that framework. There's there's joy, happiness, and sadness are sort of the main characters, like Phyllis from the Office of Sadness, right? I think, um, and Amy Poehler is the happy one, right? And then there's But then there's anger, disgust, and fear. But they left out surprise, I think, because it would be a kind of a weird character, I guess. It would just oh my God, keys. You want to kill them immediately, right? Yeah, right, 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 right.
Me in the kitchen on my noise canceling headphones on, and one of my housemates walks by.
So that's a fun. That's yeah. No, surprises always felt a little odd, and it's interesting in this analysis to see it kind of get stuck really with the others. Let's see if I can finish that this weekend.
Someone at Disney read one like paper on happiness. You got the idea.
Basically, yeah. They like here's a theory. Let's build a whole thing. We'll make a cute thing.
Their
Okay.
brainstorm process is like, what's some object that we can take and make sentient? And then they were like, all right, let's just make the motion sentient. What haven't we personified? Yeah, people. That's so true. That is Disney's whole process.
But somehow, like, the brave little toaster is the most tragic thing in the universe. Like, you wouldn't expect from if you start off with let's personify objects. How do you get the most the most tragic toaster in the world?
People weep. People weep for the toaster. No,
It's too sad. They went too far.
That's like the studio that makes Pokemon. This is like the nerdiest thing that I probably said in this class, but it's fine.
there are no depths. It's okay.
Yeah. So there's like a Pokemon in like the third Pokemon game they made. It's called a Bidoof. It's just like oversized squirrel, and it does like no one uses it for anything, but like you have to like use certain abilities to like get around in the game, like fly, like you travel the water and everything. And everyone just gets this Pokemon just to use it for all because it can have all the abilities that you need, but you never like use it in the game. So then Pokemon made like a whole cartoon that's this Pokemon like it starts like it's a cartoon where like a trainer catches the Pokemon and then it just becomes like depressed
Oh
because
no!
it's like severely depressed because it realized it's only used as like a utility. And it's so sad. Like the Pokemon becomes.
Does it come? Is there any?
In the end, it literally like it ends sad again. Like he comes out and it's like he's fight. It's like oh this guy's in like the Pokemon like basically the championship battling right, and like this guy's down to his last Pokemon, so he throws out the Bidoof and the Bidoof comes out and it's like oh what do I need to like smash or like get through for you today? And it's like a giant other Pokemon, and he's like, "What?" And then he's killed. And he dies. And I was like, "Oh, this is way too real." This is released by the
I
state.
don't. And the moral of the story is, give up.
Never aim higher.
Just like don't even try.
Did they just like admit that their whole world is about animal abuse?
That's not good. Oh, oh my God! Not even pretending.
Yeah.
That was too much. Okay, so those word shifts are too elaborate, but I think that elicited good questions. I think it feels like we're beginning to understand these things. So I don't know. I don't want to overstate it. But they're tricky for people. I don't know. They're tricky for people. Yes.
Could you use like the same process of like making those word shifts to do with like I guess like the same thing at two different time points? Like maybe you have like a bunch of metrics of some like maybe you have like a power plant like at time A and like time B, and then you like change something like fundamental about the power plant, and then like a bunch of like your metrics change. Like
Yep.
could you like you could still use that?
Yeah, you should be able to, if you can, I mean, you have to look at how that metric is scored, but a lot of things you can pull apart. Like you can do it with entropy, right? You can say it's P log P, and log P is the score. It is P, it's a sum of P times a blob. If it's structured in that way, it's no problem. A lot of things you can do like this.
It's still like useful to like look at it in that way, probably.
Well, you might find though, like, depending on the score, how it works, like it may not have that plus or minus thing. Yeah, for sure.
I guess like to make
Sure.
what's the difference between like that then versus just like parallel maybe stacked bar graphs?
the um, I mean, a lot of things you might just see changes in weights of things. It's just the change in probability. So it's really just what the word shift is for is just the sum of p, which is equals 1 in both of them, right? It doesn't change. But sum of p minus p, right, for the word in the different time or different systems, you can make a word shift for that. It doesn't, the weighting is p times 1. It doesn't have any special thing attached to it. So that's that is a case, like that's a special case, I think. Maybe that's, um, I mean, it is adding up changes in things. I mean, it's a derivative thing, so anything can kind of fit like this. It just took a little bit of work. It takes a little bit of work to structure it so that when you look at it, you can see like these things are making it go this way, these things are making it go this way. You can easily mess this up. And basically no one has ever done this. I don't know, it's not like I'm not proposing anything really hard, and we've used them for many years. I know Danforth reviewed a paper at some point which was saying, the weather, like tweets about the weather or something, climate change, was going down and people are less happy. And just like asking them, like, you have to look at, like, just look at show us which words are doing it, right? Because we know from experience, like, you have to be really careful with your, because we're not reading all the tweets, right? So you get this big collection, you think it's about a thing, maybe it's a mess, for example. Like we did a thing with e-cigs, we thought we'd just see what people say about e-cigs. It turned out in that one, it was like 95% were these kind of bot ads, and it led to a whole, which we just didn't, anticipate. Another one was about location, right? So we got all this GPS located tweet data, which you can't get much anymore. It's much thinner, but back 2012, there were maybe 1% had GPS. So we're like, okay, great. Let's take that subset. It's problematic for various reasons. What we didn't know beforehand was that, ambulances tweet, weather bots, they're all, which, maybe we didn't know to the extent that they did that. So we got all these words like pressure, falling, rising, which are totally weather things, crash, which are all like police, like chirper things, which are good service pieces, and they sort of fit in as sort of infrastructure, like broadcasting stuff, but was grossly problematic, right? And the word shifts, they just pop straight up, and you're like, oh, that's a weird thing. Like thirsty, for example, became this weird word at some point, and it was. I know it's changed in meaning completely now, but there was a meme that went around for a while where people just wrote on Twitter, just got repeated a billion times, like a tweet that was just full of the word thirsty, and it just like messed it up. So you kind of had to just switch that one off. Like we're just going to take this off the list. It doesn't change any of the time series because it's just a small word, but it took away, it was.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like what these wordships would look like when we were like 13. It'd be so weird. It'd be so, like when the Harlem Shake is a thing and everything. I would
Right.
just love to see what the wordships look like.
Right, pretty strange things.
Harlem Shake.
To get back to this paper that Danforth was reviewing, he just said, look, can we see and they objected and said we can't do that because like if we did that, then if everyone had to do that, then 95% of all these papers would disappear. I mean, that's the problem. You have papers that you just cannot tell. Ignore. Always quit unexpectedly. I love that. I feel like I'm expecting it. I think I had a tweet like, democracy quit unexpectedly. Please restart. But not really that unexpected. Anyway, so I don't know what, I mean, look, some people have done some stuff with word cloud things, which is sort of something, but they're, it's not that hard to do something a little bit better. I think back when we started doing this, we thought, oh, well, people will just make their own little thing. They'll roll their own thing, which was, in retrospect, not right. We should have packaged it way back when, I don't know if Python was still, anyway. Yeah, make it easier for people. I want to still talk about some of the introductory stuff because we'll go, like, now we've got a fair amount in place. I just want to also just go back and kind of capture some of the stuff we missed, right? So this is a motivation for measuring happiness, right? So this is Robert Kennedy, who's speaking of stories, right? His son is the one who's the anti-vax guy at the moment. Measures everything except, right? So this is about GDP. I mean, we're sort of going up against this a little bit. It's not the main thing, but if we could, we feel like we're good at measuring money. Whether we are or not is another question. But we do it, and there's a graph, and there's like the Dow and what it is, and yeah. Except we're proud that right. This is, I know I've shown you this one before. Measure is to know. If you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. And we just live in a very problematic age, I think, where we can measure a lot of things, put them on graphs and so on. And you know, this has always been engineers. I mean, this is a scientist, of course. Engineers have known this, right? The stuff you measure, you tend to focus on. For public policy, huge problem, right? I mean, it's a huge problem. Someone turns up with a graph, and so part of this whole motivation was to measure something weird that mattered. Like we're trying to get at well-being and you know this kind of stuff, and make it a something that people can see in the real world. Yeah. So he also kind of was missed this completely, right? Nothing. I mean, chaos theory really surprising, or quantum, of course, as well, right? So this falls apart. X-rays will prove to be a hoax. Yeah. So you know, I will say that I really don't like this in writings, the chapters where it's like a quote from some famous person. I really don't like it. Anyway.
What if it's Terry Pratchett?
But he makes.
No,
Oh, you mean a quote of his?
a quote of Terry Pratchett. Would you allow that?
I just find it's a bit twee at the top of the thing. He has it in Morris and His Educated Rodents, and it's from Mr. Bunsey Has an Adventure.
Yes, that's true. But that's different.
No, that's fun. That's totally
that's
fun.
like in-world.
And it's like, Jasper Ford does that, I think. And that's what I'm trying to get to. Hitchhiker's Guide, yeah. Encyclopedia Galactica. Mostly harmless. All right. So these are measurement things. I mean, I know I've showed you this before in talks, but it's just like, it is really interesting to think about our progress with measuring stuff, you know. And in some ways, measuring time was our big mistake. But if we hadn't done that, we'd be set. But this is not long ago, right? And it's enabled so much technological advance. It really hinges on this. But people are still running around with sundials, you know, well, not running around, but having them attached to things in Europe. I think Asterix and Obelix, they turn up with like little sundials on there. Who has a sundial wristwatch? Or maybe it's like the Flintstones or something. Actually, we have a premier sundial, Bill Gottesman, who's a friend of the show. He makes sundials, and he lives just over here on the hill. And he has them installed all around the country. There's one at the Echo Center, which is he does very complicated, made-up ones that do all sorts of things. Yeah, not just basic stuff, like ridiculous things. Yeah.
If you make sundials, are you still a horologist, or is it a different word?
That's a good question. I know there's a sundial, like, what would you call it? It's not a community. Like they meet every year, kind of thing. There's a sundial conferences. There is a. I don't know. It should have a name. I'm sure there's a.
No, it's not ours. It's like
Right, from Greek.
I don't know what that's true.
Well, it's definitely Greek, but if it's Horus, which is like the Egyptian god, then like Ra is the sun god, so maybe the Raology.
Sorry, I once again derailed things.
It's okay. Yeah, this is Wiktionary. This is just a Wiktionary. So this is this not doing what? Yeah. So that's where we get hour from. Yeah, I don't know if it's getting hooked up to a.
So you could
Chronos. Chronos is the Greek god of time, right? Chronos? Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. You could be a paleo horologist or classical, yeah. Or a litho horologist if you make it out of stone. It could be the wood ones. Anyway, this is, it's remarkable to think about this. Temperature was a big thing. We'll talk about that next week with the telephone, but just measuring temperature. These are really these are things that were absolutely bedrock now, in physics. Just measuring distances, right. And we messed up the time thing a couple of years ago now, where someone wrote a paper, they put a paper in the archive where they thought they found that, what was it? Neutrinos had traveled faster than light. Where there's some measurement, some empirical measurement. And there's like hundreds of papers appear, because they go berserk about it. But it seems like someone just messed up the clocks on some satellites or something. Like forgot the general relativity correction, because you need general relativity to get GPS to work. Anyway, they messed it up, but they had a great time. I'm pretty sure some people tried to start some financial things.
Like a week ago, I was like, oh my god, it's broken.
I know what the stuff. It just
The
would.
universe is broken.
You broke the thing. Anyway, all right. One of my favorite cartoons. Okay, you've seen this.
No, that's so true.
This is where pure mathematicians live. Boop, 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 boop.
We were
Mostly hit.
We were talking about data
Sometimes.
in meta-ethics class, because for some reason that's what they want to call something that we're doing. And like,
Meta ethics.
yeah, which is, and it was so funny because like the data aren't, it's not like data, but it's like, yeah, I'll be quick.
No. I just.
And it was really funny because our professor said, he's like, data is the thing that you look at and then you do the theorizing, right? And then there's a bunch of like people that do like biology and stuff in the class, and they were like, wait, don't you make a hypothesis?
Yeah.
I was just like,
Oh.
no, please, real science.
Well, you get to play that game once you've really solved a lot of things. When you really know.
Just play hard mode.
You just you know a ton of stuff, and it's not like right. The hypothesis just I don't understand it. Yeah. Mind you, I mean, conceptions of how to run civilizations were sort of thought up by people sitting in rooms, like staring at a wall with some pencils. It's kind of weird, right? They didn't run these simulations. It's like we should have a king. I mean, but it's just, I guess it's a hypothesis. Anyway, these are ridiculous little contraptions. Sort of, this is the idea, right? Like there's speech, and we're kind of trying to measure stuff from it. And I scribbled this a long time ago, but kind of have always had this idea, and maybe I should blow it up, but these sort of principal lexical meters, like hedonimeter, lexicocalorimeter, which I'll show you, where you have words or phrases, and then there are scores associated with them that are determined offline. There's something, right? And there's sort of ground truth ones where you could say, okay, we've got all this text coming from whatever it is, cable news or, Reddit, whatever it is, and there's something that's going on that we're trying to like basically correlate it with it, and then sort of show that we can, this is where sort of dangerous deep learning things could work, or you would hope maybe it's more transparent, but definitely there's a big game, but there's some ground truth in there, like I have a hangover meter, right? So there's like CDC kind of numbers on binge drinking, for example, right? So you kind of have those rates over time, and then you could look at maybe tweets coming out of that space and see what's going on. Sleep insufficiency. I mean, this is something I wanted to do for a long time, and we may get it with this mass mutual stuff that we're doing now, which is going to, I think, run on the Oura rings. You guys know about the thing, right? So it's a ring you wear that measures, actually, I think they went on this, that measures your heart rate and stuff like that. I mean, just a normal smartwatch kind of thing, but all it is a ring. So I have one of this watch is relatively new, and it tells me like terrible things all the time. It's like you slept poorly. Maybe I've already told you that. So it's bad because it'll say things like you'll forget things. You may forget. Yeah, right. But then you could have some others where you just sort of build it out of, say, Twitter or whatever, like, just measure hashtags, and try to say something, bootstrap it out of that, and try to sort of figure out things from, like people just talking about saying they're bored. You know, I need to get that on the question. Anyway, these are sort of the things we've tried to build to start with, but these are all been sitting around. I'll say a couple of other things. I know this could all be at the start, but just to say that this has been around for a long time, right? So the ancient Greeks talking about eudaimonia. This will be distinguished from perhaps instant or like how well you feel now, like what's your sort of happiness level right now versus your happiness, your concept of your life. So there's sort of that's sometimes broken apart. So this is of course, but this is sometimes construed as maybe alcohol and food is sort of the ingredient here. But different conceptions of it. But flourishing is sort of the idea there. Right? Bentham, who is a taxidermy victim sitting in either Cambridge or Oxford, like he's okay. Let's come back to Bentham. But Bentham, a tricky character, right? I mean, he had the panopticon, which is like, again, person sitting in a room thinking of clever things. Let's make a prison where all the prisoners have windows and there's a guard, but you can't tell if you can never be really sure if the guard's looking at you or not. So panopticon. So just good thinking, just creative minds doing, I mean, it's like Da Vinci, or Leonard de Quim, every second thing is a scribble is like a horrible war machine, and then there's a beautiful picture of a flower or something. Dangerous people. And we'll finish with this last thing. We'll talk about Bentham next time, but Jefferson, The Pursuit of Happiness, right? That was put in with some editing, right? Because apparently it was, from what I understand, it was life, liberty, and property, which doesn't really soar rhetorically, I suppose. But then they got to this one. That's practice, I think.
They should have put alcohol in there. They should have so much alcohol.
This is an official. This is a lost document. What's it? Except in New Hampshire or wherever, Well, this would prove very contentious, right? This would prove to be a big. They could have helped a lot. Guns and beer. All right. We talk about things.